let's talk about content editorials. So I have actually trained before on how to put together a content editorial because I do think it is such a vital skill. But I also think that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So what I'm going to do today, instead of kind of walking you through the discrete components of what makes a great content editorial, I'm just going to show you a bunch of different versions of content editorials. Because creating format and structure around what you plan to produce is vitally important. And even if you have a very good project management system in place, you still need to have the basics together. You still need to understand the phases a project goes through, the tags. You need to understand titles. You need to understand the data that it's important for everybody to see. And your ability to quickly organize all of that in a way that makes sense in the context you're functioning in is valuable. And it creates more value around you as a professional and a part of a team. So I am literally just going to walk you through a whole bunch of editorials that we use at Hire a Writer for clients and some that we use for ourselves. And I think that it's going to help you kind of get a handle on all the various types of editorial calendars that you could possibly create, from the incredibly complex to the incredibly simple, and hopefully it's helpful for you. So let's dive in, and I'm going to look at tons of real-world examples here. So let's start simple. So there are ways to create content calendars that are really favor simplicity. The one that I have in front of you here is for one of our clients called Trax. They're a fantastic transportation and logistics company. And we have, as you can see already, there are some specific components that we want to track. So we keep track of how many articles we're creating by month, okay? So you'll notice we don't have the specific day on here because it doesn't really matter. Every single week we deliver content by Thursday and it gets posted. So that's just the regular flow, and we know how many articles we're creating in a given month, and that's kind of our monthly scheduling cadence. What we need to know is if it's associated with a topic cluster, so we've indicated that here. We need to know the content type, the SEO key phrase, and then I have in here just kind of an overview of the tactics because that's part of our planning process. So you'll notice that sometimes a lot of the editorial calendar makeup decisions that you make are really related to how the content is ideated and planned for, and that can be a helpful way to kind of help you understand what are the actual parts on that you need to have on a content editorial, as opposed to things that you would have on a planning document, a campaign tracker, or some of the other assets that you'll create related to a content strategy. Okay, we almost always have a link to doc column because I think that obviously it's the easiest way to kind of track progress. And then we'll include some, internal or external links. These are mostly reference, and then we've got status types, okay? The status types on this one is queue, ready for editor, ready for writer, scheduled, and posted. So very, very simple version of a content editorial. We've used a version like this many, many times with clients, and it can be a really easy kind of rinse and repeat. Another version, so that's kind of simple SEO content. As you can already imagine, if you're creating content for multiple channels, I can say with confidence, I almost never have a lot of success centralizing that. I find it a lot easier to have like a separate social editorial, a separate blog editorial, a separate email editorial, simply because the cycle of producing that kind of content varies a lot, meaning you're going to have different status types. And so it's really, really hard to put all of that in the same system where it's got to kind of comply with the same fields, okay? The volume of content you create for different platforms or different channels can vary significantly. So if you're doing, kind of a spreadsheet where you've got all your social posts, that could be 20, form fields or, not form fields, like 20 cells on a spreadsheet. Whereas if you're doing blogs, it might be 4, right? So just the kind of volume and all of that. So I often find that disparity makes it almost essential to have kind of a repository that is shared among a repository that's shared, but then you have like different tabs or different areas in the task. Okay, hopefully that made sense. This is another version. So as you can probably recognize if you're familiar with project management, this has a Gantt style chart to it. That was helpful for this client. So this is a sales training organization, fantastic company. And we do have different categories here. So I wanted to show you this right on the heels of saying what I just said about volume, because we are able to put all of the content needs onto one piece of paper, but then make it very clear where the calendar was. So part of the reason that we would choose a format like this is leadership preference. So if leadership wants to see something very specific, then you may have a very data-driven editorial, or you may have a very report-oriented editorial where you're like, you know, you've got the email plan here, and then you have your click-through rate in a column, and then you've got your open rate in a column, and you've got like the metrics you're measuring. You know, if you're gonna get that granular, I would probably suggest that you do centralize it in a system like your HubSpot or something, because all of that data is already in the platform, and there's no real reason to take it off and put it somewhere else. So when we come to just like strictly content editorials, point is leadership preference and all the stakeholders that need to be involved in the process of monitoring this kind of content should factor into how you schedule, should factor into how you present the information, because that is just an important part of it. So let's go into another really simplified version of an editorial. I wanted to show you this because this is like a very high volume client, okay? So this is a client where we were creating, as you can see, like at first I think it was 5 blogs a month, and then we went to like 12 blogs a month. And so when you're creating at that volume, as you can imagine, you have to be really careful that managing the editorial doesn't itself become a burdensome task, because at scale, it becomes almost unimportant to look at some of the granular elements. So like if you'll notice on this document, we don't list every key phrase because it's in the title. We don't list any metrics. We literally just have you know, date, title, link to doc, post date status. And even that, you know, we didn't really get good about tracking until later, just because it is so hard to track. Now, I will acknowledge to you that like for this client, we asynchronously had project management running in ClickUp. So we did have more detail, and we had a little bit more kind of tracking of the actual production cycle of the content. But I wanted to just make the point that when you're producing a lot of content, creating a very complex editorial that has all this like multi-dimensional data and information and stuff, that in and of itself becomes a huge task to manage something like that. So don't create a system or an editorial where most of your time is spent managing it. Keep it as simple as it can possibly be and still satisfy the needs of all the stakeholders and the project itself. All right, let's just look at a couple more examples. Again, I think that every time you see one of these, you'll start to see fields that you like. You'll start to see categories that you're like, oh, maybe I should be tracking that as well. And it can kind of help you start to assemble for yourself, hey, what is kind of an ideal editorial for my specific client group or for my specific company? So I'm just going to give you a few more examples. This is an example of a contract research organization. Whoops. And we had, one of the big emphases for them was themes. So we went through and selected, you know, these various themes. It's bucketed out by month still, and then it is the content for the social media, linked to graphic, and then we did clarify objective. And so instead of doing status type or anything like that, we just had reviewer feedback. Which is, you know, whether it was ready to go, scheduled, all of that kind of thing. And then there's a couple more, you know, fields there that help the wider research team and contributors understand. I will mention that there's a key. So it's very important that if you color code something and its intention is to actually, you know, separate out content according to category, and the categorization of that content impacts what kind of content you create. So for instance, if we were sub-branding based on categories, or if we had, you know, a specific style, or if we had specific regulatory considerations for saying something, anything that relates to how content is produced or needs to be approved, if you color code it, make sure there's a color key so that anybody looking at it can quickly understand, why is this a separate category and what does it mean that it's in that category? So just making sure, again, like simple, user-friendly. You can make really beautiful, elaborate editorials that nobody ever understands or looks at besides you, and that really is not a good use of your time. Here's another example of one that is not pretty at all, but has a lot of detail to it. This one goes through categories. So it's copy, visual, it indicates what the budget is, it creates a spot for client comments, and then who's creating it and who's posting it. So this is very tactical, right? This is very much like practical, here's how it works. And one of the things I wanted to point out to this was that we create links. So I do think it's important, unless you have a project management tool where you are centralizing things like logins and access that have to be shared, centralizing things like graphics that are hard to drop into a spreadsheet or another thing, make sure that you've got quick links somewhere. And in the final example I show you in just a second with our social media scheduler, you'll see like the first tab of that scheduler is all links, quick links to stuff that you need in order to get the job done. That is a really helpful use of an editorial. And if you can add that, like reference materials to your editorial, everybody on the team will thank you because it makes everybody's life easier. Here's an example of a topic cluster editorial. So this is an editorial, I think this is actually Playwire, which is a really cool ad company that my friend Stacy runs the marketing for. So this is divvied up by month, as you can see, and you probably know here, you just merge cells. So you go and insert or format, merge cells, merge all, and that's a cool way to kind of create this, create this breakup here in the content. You put the title, proposed publish date, status, the writer, the SME, final review, delivery, primary keyword, general topic cluster that it's associated with. If you're doing a topic cluster, and especially if you're doing it like in HubSpot and you're going to go in and link everything, it's really helpful to have that indicated on an editorial that a specific blog piece is part of a topic cluster, because then everyone will know when we're going into linking strategies, the writer will know, every single one of these blogs has to link back to the pillar. So again, anything that impacts content production, if writers are using it, graphic designers are using it, keep it as clean as possible and include all the information so that nobody's ever having to ask you a question. All the information they need is right here, and they can go to it and look at it anytime and reference it. And don't be afraid to make changes. So if you have or you create for yourself what you think is a really solid editorial calendar, it has to be road tested. That's what I say, like the best tool is the one you will use. So make sure you practice with it, that you use it in the real world, and that you then are adapting it to what use cases it needs to be adapted to. And you may find that you've created something that's way too complicated, or that you've created something that's way too simple. So you can kind of course correct as you get it into the real world and road test it with humans, because then they'll tell you whether or not they think it works. All right, this is the last example I'm going to show you, and it has what I talked about a second ago, which is basically a huge resource list. So the first tab of our social media scheduler, and I will link this because it's free. We give it to you guys. You're welcome to take it, use it, copy it, paste it, because we've put a lot of time into creating it, and I think that it's helpful. So basically, we go through, and I have all the things that need to be linked, okay? And those are linked to either a spreadsheet or an actual platform. They're linked to ClickUp if they need to be linked, because that's what we use for project management. And then a quick tip of like what it is. So don't just put a list of links. Make sure you tell people like what they are and why somebody would need to see it in order to do something related to content in the company. So I just suggest to you that that is a really nice way to kind of reference. And then if you have like a little SOP, so if you have any processes, you can always type those out and make it really clear for people, like, here's what all the tags mean. Here's what all the colors mean. This would be a good place for the color key. Here's kind of the relevant information you're going to need to use this tool well. And then this is an example of like a weekly editorial checklist. So for our blog, here's the phases it goes through. God help us, that's elaborate. Here's LinkedIn, the phases it goes through, Instagram, okay, TikTok, all the different platforms that we work on. So in that, we have a really robust platform messaging analysis that says who we're talking to on different platforms and all the kind of resources that somebody would need to execute that well. And then here would be the actual month. So this would be like March social media, right? Here's all the blogs, the TikTok videos, reels, newsletters, all the things that we're doing for every week of the month. I always do links as much as possible, and then explanations if links are not possible. So that's just kind of that. And then in my editorials, I almost always include like an idea parking lot, because there are always going to be things that that it kind of occurs to you or your team throughout the course of the month that you're like, well, maybe we're going to talk about that next month. Or maybe, we had a trending topic come in and kind of hijack what our editorial was going to be. So make sure you've got a place to put what you don't use, or a place to put ideas that you haven't used yet but will use. I hope this was helpful, as like drinking from a fire hydrant maybe, but I think that examples are hugely important, and the more I can like pull back the veil and help people see how copywriting actually gets done in the real world, the better, because the better we'll all be equipped to do a really good job. I will link this social media scheduler that we have so that you can go in and look more, more at it. You can download it from our website, and I wish you all the best as you plan.